Welcome to my channel and to reflections on Immanuel Kant's a priori theory and the logic of human action, part 2. In part 1 of this video series, I have given you a brief overview of Immanuel Kant's a priori theory of knowledge. I have pointed out that Kant postulates the existence of true knowledge independent of any empirical experience, that is, a priori knowledge. According to Kant, we can obtain indisputably true statements that do not require us to resort to experience. Against this backdrop, an important question arises. Do a priori statements exist in the science of economics? Can we identify a priori knowledge in economics, knowledge whose truth value cannot be confirmed or denied by experience? The Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises answers this question in the affirmative. He contends that the theory of human action and thus economics, its so far best developed subdiscipline, is an a priori science of human action. In his words, the general science of human action is theory and not history. It is a priori knowledge and not empirical science. Mises holds the view that economics cannot be understood and meaningfully applied as an empirical science without encountering logical inconsistencies, but only as an a priori science of human action. He maintains that economic knowledge or economic laws cannot be acquired through empirical experience, but only through logical reflection. The knowledge obtained in this manner is a priori, meaning its truth value is not contingent on sensory experiences such as sight, sound, or touch. How does Mises arrive at this position? Mises turns our attention to the so-called logic of human action, which can also be called praxeology. At the heart of the logic of human action is the statement humans act. Generally speaking, human action means a person's conscious adjustment to the state of the universe that determines his life. Or more to the point, human action means substituting one state of affairs with another that is considered relatively preferable. In Mises' words, the actor seeks to replace one state of affairs with another. In his thinking, he perceives a state of affairs that he prefers over the given one, and his action is aimed at realizing this desired state of affairs. While the statement humans act may appear quite trivial at first, upon further consideration we realize that it is not trivial at all. For we cannot refute the sentence humans act without causing a logical contradiction and thus saying something false. If you say humans do not act, you would engage in an action, contradicting your very statement and rendering it false. In fact, we find that the statement humans act is an a priori. Let me remind you of the definition of an a priori statement. An a priori statement is necessarily and universally true, independent of experience. It cannot be denied without causing a logical contradiction. To deny an a priori statement means presupposing its validity. Let us take a closer look at the statement humans act. To start with, I should point out that there are at least 3 prerequisites for any human action. First, human action implies that the actor is dissatisfied or unhappy with the state of affairs he finds himself in. If acting man was content, satisfied, he would not act. In other words, the incentive that impels an actor to act is always some dissatisfaction, some uneasiness. Second, human action requires that the actor's mind imagines conditions which suit the actor better. And third, the actor expects that purposeful behavior has the power to remove, or at least to alleviate, the felt uneasiness. These are the three general conditions of human action. The really important aspect I would like to highlight in this context, however, is that from the indisputably true statement, humans act, we can deduce other true statements. I would like to give you some examples. For instance, we know without doubt that human action is inherently goal-oriented or purposeful. Attempting to refute this assertion by stating, for instance, human action is not purposeful, would lead to a logical contradiction, because such a statement is undoubtedly purposeful, thus contradicting itself, rendering it false. Human action, the pursuit of goals, requires the use of means, whether it involves using vocal cords while speaking, hand movements while writing, or using intermediate goods in production processes. Human action devoid of means is logical inconceivable, as it would result in the instantaneous achievement of all desired goals, negating the possibility of action, an untenable notion that inherently contradicts itself. Means or goods are scarce. If they were not scarce, they would not qualify as means or goods requiring economization. Instead, they would have to be considered exogenous factors in human action. That said, the concept of scarcity is implied in the statement humans act. Furthermore, human action is bound to time. Time serves as a means that actors must use to achieve their objectives. Human action without time would entail a goal being achieved immediately, rendering human action impossible, contradicting the irrevocably true assertion humans act. Time is an a priori category of human action. Human action necessitates cause and effect, or causality, meaning that an action, a cause, can bring about a desired outcome, an effect. Only those who perceive the environment through the lens of causality can engage in action. Without causality, the actor would be unable to act. Human action implies the a priori category of causality. The concept of time preference is also a priori. Time preference denotes an actor's inclination to prioritize, fulfilling desires sooner rather than later, all else being equal. Time preference may vary from person to person, and a person's time preference can also change over time. However, an actor's time preference is always and everywhere positive and cannot vanish or turn negative. Originary interest, or the originary interest rate, is a manifestation of time preference. It signifies the discount in value a future good experiences compared to a present good from the actor's perspective. And just as time preference is a category of human action, the same holds true for originary interest, which dwells within each individual actor. It cannot disappear, diminish to zero, or even become negative. Another fundamental aspect of human action is uncertainty. If the future were entirely certain, events would follow a predetermined path, rendering the actor powerless to change their course through action. Such a scenario would reduce the actor to something akin to an automaton, devoid of free will. However, the logic of human action refutes this assertion as false. Uncertainty and human action go hand in hand. Also, concepts such as, say, value, price, costs, success and failure, and profit and loss are also a priori categories of human action, often referred to as operational logic concepts. Property, understood as the ownership of one's body, the so-called self-ownership, and external possessions acquired non-aggressively, also constitutes a category of human action. Property is inherently a priori, an undeniable truth as human action is concerned. The list of what is implied by the a priori that humans act, we can call these insights categories of human action, could be expanded further. However, it may suffice to highlight one of Mises' great achievements: to have shown that there are insights implied in the logic of human action that form the a priori foundation for the science of economics. All true economic propositions can be deduced by means of formal logic from the incontestably true material knowledge regarding the meaning of human action and its categories. Economic theories that do not comply with the categories of human action must be considered nonsensical, false. A rather interesting question arises in this context. What epistemological status should be ascribed to the statement "humans act"? The statement undoubtedly holds validity a priori according to Ludwig von Mises. His student Murray Rothbard also considers the sentence "humans act" an a priori, not in a Kantian context, however, but rather from an Aristotelian and neo-Thomist perspective. Hans Hermann Hoppe sees the sentence "humans act" as a Kantian synthetic judgment a priori, that is, a prerequisite for the possibility of objectifiable knowledge gained through experience. And the philosophers of the Hamburg school, Rolf Puster and Michael Olivar Cordoba, consider Mises' assertion an analytical a priori. Regardless of the individual interpretations, however, they all agree that the statement "humans act" is considered indisputably true and cannot be denied without logical contradiction. Consequently, the true statement "humans act" can serve as a starting point for scientific inquiry. It is a fundamental truth that stands beyond the reach of final justification. In other words, the sentence "humans act" is an ultimate given. The apodictically true statement "humans act" makes possible the reconstruction of economics as an a priori science of human action, a science that provides us with true knowledge about the reality of human action, independent of any empirical data. And so Mises says about economics that its statements and propositions are not derived from experience. They are, like those of logic and mathematics, a priori. They are not subject to verification and falsification on the ground of experience and facts. They are both logically and temporally antecedent to any comprehension of historical facts. They are a necessary requirement of any intellectual grasp of historical events. Let me add that from my point of view, Mises' own wording can be related to Kant's idea of synthetic a priori statements. The German philosopher Holm Tetens explains Kant's idea of the synthetic statement a priori as follows: there are necessary conditions of experience that arise from the exercise of our cognitive faculties. All objects of our experience must conform to these conditions. Therefore, the statements that claim the objects of experience are subject to these conditions are synthetic a priori statements. That said, the necessary conditions of our experience are the true statements which we logically derive from the a priori statement that humans act. To put it differently, if an object of our experience cannot become objectifiable knowledge, gained through experience without being subject to condition A, then the statement "the object of experience is subject to condition A" is a synthetic statement a priori. One last point worth considering. In part 1 of the video series, I have discussed Kant's a priori statements. An a priori statement is apodictically true. It cannot be denied without causing a logical contradiction. An example is the sentence "bachelors are unmarried." Kant also uses the term pure a priori. Pure refers to knowledge that is not mixed with empirical content or sensory data. It is clean of any experience or contingent facts. A Kantian example is the following mathematical statement. All points on a circle's circumference are equidistant from its center. What is more, Kant uses the term pure concepts of the understanding. These pure concepts of understanding are a subset of pure a priori knowledge, and they denote a priori mental structures that help us organize and interpret the world. Kant refers to them as categories, asserting that without them we cannot obtain objective knowledge of reality. As was pointed out earlier, means, scarcity, time preference, the originary interest rate, and others are categories of human action. Now, Kant seeks to uncover the source of the unity inherent in all our intellectual conditions shaping our experience, the origin from which we consolidate and comprehend our countless perceptions and from which all our categories ultimately emerge. In Kant's words, he is looking for the original synthetic unity of apperception, signifying the ability of our reason to construct objects of experience from sensory perceptions through synthesis. Synthesis meaning a process that unifies our experience. Kant pinpoints the origin of the unity of our objects of experience in the self-consciousness of the subject. According to Kant, the assertion "I think" represents an irreducible concept. It embodies the original synthetic unity of apperception. Kant articulates his finding as follows. The "I think" must be able to accompany all my representations. Otherwise, something would be imagined in me that could not be thought at all, which means the same as the representation would either be impossible or at least nothing for me. Thinking, or personalized for the individual actor "I think", on the other hand, represents a tangible form of human action. From this perspective, Mises' statement "humans act", or personalized for the individual actor "I act", appears to be an irreducible concept. The entirety of all sensory perceptions, encompassing the categories of action, is inherently contingent upon this condition of "I act". And so we find that the foundation of epistemology, the theory of knowledge, is the logic of human action. The logic of human action must be regarded as the very foundation of epistemology. That said, Mises' assertion that humans act would not only qualify as a priori, but would even be considered pure a priori according to Kant. Mises seems to have silently reached a similar conclusion when he wrote, "It is our human characteristic that we are thinking and acting beings, and as humans we know what thinking and acting mean. If we were not thinkers and actors ourselves, no experience could tell us what thinking and acting are." The logic of human action can thus be understood as the most fundamental concept, serving as the foundational condition for all our understanding, akin to the original synthetic unity of apperception in the Kantian sense. The practical ramifications and the implications of the logical insights into human actions for the social and economic sciences will be discussed in the third and final part of this video series. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you enjoyed the video, please like and share it, ring the bell, follow my channel, and please don't miss the third part.